Well, thank you. That was so nice. Well, I'm very, very excited to share this morning. This is, we're going to be talking about hospitality. I know that sounds a little lightweight, but it's not. Trust me, and we'll get into that. But if you know me, you know that hospitality is really a big part of my heart. Inviting people in, helping them feel seen and loved. I just, I don't know. I think that's where a lot of the magic happens. But before we get to kind of the heavy duty parts of my text, I wanted to share with you a little story from 8th grade. You ready? And some of you have probably heard this, but and it may not come as a surprise to you, but 8th grade for me was a little rough. Um, I had went to a private, very small private school my whole life. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 kids in my grade. And we had moved from Oregon to Minneapolis, and I started public school for the first time. And I really loved the color yellow. And so I had a lot of yellow clothing, which turns out is just wasn't good. Wasn't good. I was really, really bullied. And so my sister and I both were incredibly bullied. And from it, actually, it was a good thing for me because it kind of made me fearless. But at the same time, I would isolate myself. I wouldn't do anything to put myself out there because just being myself sometimes was too much for people. And so 8th grade came and went, and we survived. And then by 9th grade, we noticed that most of our classmates had grown up, and bullying wasn't such an issue. And in fact, we would have people come up to us. We'd be standing by our lockers, and we'd have different people come up to us and say, "Hey, sorry we were mean to you last year." And so I was like, wow, 9th grade, high school's going to be better. It's going to be so much better than 8th grade. Yay, woo! But I was still isolating. I was still afraid to put myself out there. And one of these kind of God moments in my life, I was in English class, and there was a girl named Dawn in English class. And she was like popular. And so she one day came and she said, "Hey, would you want to come over to my house one day?" And a little bit I was like, oh, if you've seen the movie Carrie, don't watch it. But it's a nightmare. And people pretend to be someone's friend just to do something really mean. And so I had this moment of, oh, was she just being nice to me to do something mean? But I took a risk and I went to her home. And she's actually someone I'm still friends with today. She really just was kind, and she thought I was cool, and she wanted to be friends. But she was super involved in things, super, super involved. And I was like, not for me. I went to school. I went home. We kept a deep fryer on the counter growing up. I'd deep fry something and I'd watch a show. That was kind of my life for a little bit in 9th grade. And so one day she just sat me down and she said, "Michelle, you need to get involved because this is not working. What you're doing, this is not working." And she said, "Come and see. Just come and see." And so she made me try out for a musical. So not only was I like entering into a community that I knew nothing about, I had to sing. And I ended up getting, it was The Sound of Music. I was the Mother Abbess, got a lead. Yeah. But her invitation to me was not about just the invitation. It was about something more. And little did she know that her encouragement to come and see, to check it out, would really start a whole life where I'm willing to kind of jump into things and try things, even if I'm not good at it, even if I don't know anyone, because I learned the value of what an invitation can do. But it's not just an invitation, it's a promise of something more. And so that is just one little story about my life, how an invitation changed the course of my life. And so today, we are going to be looking at an account of Jesus that was written by the Apostle John. And we hear different voices throughout the Bible say, come and see. And in fact, one of the first voices to say this was Jesus. And so some of what I'll be talking about today, you've heard before over the past couple weeks, especially a lot of the stories we've been sharing. There's a context that kind of, it goes back and forth, and they all speak into the validity of what was happening in this moment. Our story today starts with John the Baptist. And I, for the longest time, thought that Baptist was his last name. Does anybody? I grew up in the church. I have a pastor father, but for some reason I thought Baptist was John's last name. It's not, just so you know. It is because he was known to baptize people who were willing to turn away from their sin and turn to God. And so he is known as John the Baptist. And today we're reading from a gospel written by a guy named John, but they are two different people. I have a friend whose husband, son, son-in-law, and grandson are all named John. I don't know, like when you say John pass the potatoes, I don't know who passes the potatoes. But John is not only a popular name today, it was a popular day in historical times. So we have an account of a guy named John written by someone named John. Okay, we got it? Okay. So kind of a cool backstory with John the Baptizer. He and his mom, there's a story of when he was in his mother's womb, and they were going to meet up with this cousin and friend named Mary. And when Mary walks up, it says that John leapt in his mother's womb. And so there's a lot of stories about John that are similar to Jesus. He had this angelic proclamation that came when he was arriving in his mother's womb. Also, his mom was 88. That's who wants to give birth at 88? Not me. And so there was just a lot about John's birth and life that was miraculous and beautiful. And then here he was in the presence of the Messiah. Even in the womb, he leapt. I just love that story. So John is a part of Jesus' life in one way or another from the beginning. And we don't know all the details, but we know that as John grew up, God's hand was on his life, and he became a prophet, a teacher of God. And he, like Jake was saying, if you were a teacher, you would have disciples. And he had many disciples, just like Jesus. And probably many of them thought, hey, this could be the Messiah. This could be the one that we're waiting for that's going to come and rescue us. And so our scripture today, it's about John and his disciples, and they're at the River Jordan, and they're baptizing different people. And there's this question, everyone's looking for the Messiah, and they come up to him, the religious leaders and the priests, and they say, hey, are you the guy? Are you the Messiah? Are you the guy? And John says, no, I'm not the guy. And then they say, well, who are you? Which I think is kind of like, I don't know. I just can picture this, and all his disciples are watching. They're like, oh, is he the guy? Is he going to let us know? Is he the guy? And he says, no, I'm not the guy. I am the one preparing the way. I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness. Make straight the way for the Lord. And so John, he's not the guy. And at this point, I don't think he's even sure who the guy is, but he knows that he's supposed to help make the way. And I imagine his disciples, like they were listening, they're like, oh, is this the moment we find out? And I imagine a little disappointment. It's kind of like you see someone walk into a room with a present, and you're like, ooh, I wonder if that's for me, but then they give it to someone else. Just a little disappointment. Okay, this isn't the guy. I imagine they were bummed. They were hoping he was the guy. So we're going to start in John 1, verse 35. So this is the next day after this interaction had happened. The next day, John was there again with his two disciples, And when he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" I think that's hilarious. He's like, "What do you want?" And they said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said, "Come." He replied, "and you will see." He had an invitation. So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. So come and you will see. What do you think Jesus meant by "you will see"? I don't think he was referring to his lodging, is it a 3-5-star kind of place? Is there a TV, a pool? We know it wasn't about the digs, but it was about the person. And even though Jesus said to them, "Hey, what do you want?" I think he already knew what they wanted. They were looking for the Messiah. They were looking for the one who would answer the question, who was the promise. They were looking, and he said, "Come and see." And this is sacred hospitality. Some of you have maybe referred to hospitality as sacred, and I truly believe that it is. Jesus welcomed the disciples in his home. He invited them over and said, "Spend time with me, and you will see if I'm the one that you're looking for. Just spend time with me, and you'll know the answer to your question." And hospitality might seem like lightweight stuff. There's so many books or magazines. And that kind of hospitality maybe is that we hear about in books and magazines. But the kind of hospitality we hear about in Scripture is really the powerhouse of Christianity. And it's one of the most incredible expressions of faith. And if you want to change the world, hospitality has to be a part of it. Looking in the New Testament, we hear different things about hospitality. It was such a crucial tool to the New Testament church. And as you're reading, you can kind of see a definition, a description form. And it's this: it is action and affection, receiving and loving a stranger. Action and affection, receiving and loving a stranger. It's not about the best of food, the right centerpieces, the right lighting, the right music, the right conversation topics. It's about an active love that welcomes in the stranger. And so Jesus didn't try to answer who he was in that moment. They said, "Hey, Jesus, we're curious about you." And he didn't try to answer their question from a sermon, from a platform, from a really beautiful prayer, even though I'm sure when they were at his house, they experienced all these things. They met Jesus by him inviting them into his home, where he slept, where he ate. It was a full sensory experience. And I think often we try to share the message of Jesus very one-dimensional. But what if it was a full sensory experience where there's sight, sound, smell, touch, taste? And that's what Jesus did with these two disciples. And I wonder what they did. Did they play, I don't know, I love a good game. Did they play some board games? I don't know. They may have. I imagine there was some laughter. And with it being close to dinner time, I'm sure Jesus fed them. And who knows? Maybe they even stayed overnight. We don't know. I look forward to having all the details of these moments, but it was powerful. And whose party would you rather go to? One that Jesus is throwing, or let's say, I don't know, Buckingham Palace? I think I'd rather go to the party Jesus was throwing. And what did hospitality look like with Jesus as your host? What did they see, hear, smell, touch, taste. What was Jesus' brand of hospitality? In Matthew's account, we hear a little bit of information. You know, sometimes when we read the Bible, it's about taking pieces and it's like this puzzle that you're putting together. And so in Matthew, we get a little glimpse of what Jesus thought about hospitality. He said, "For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And then, "Whatever you do for the least of people, you do for me." So the kind of hospitality Jesus was offering was not about entertaining, but it was about how to show love to others, seeking to know how to meet their needs out of the abundance that you've been given. And this is sacred hospitality. This is how I see sacred hospitality. It might look a little different to you, but for me, it's showing affection and love for the stranger, seeking to meet others' needs with what we've been given, and sharing who Jesus is through action and testimony. Jesus said, "Spend time with me and you will know who I am." Are we willing to share our time? Are we willing to share what we've been given so that others will know who he is? And this kind of hospitality, it's not just about being friendly. I know being from Minnesota, the whole Minnesota nice thing, which there's some confusion about what that is. But it's just like there's a certain level of friendliness, and that's as far as it will go. This is a radical hospitality of the heart. This goes deep and it overflows. It's not just being polite and nice, it's grabbing hold of people. And people are still looking for the answer of who Jesus is. We're surrounded by it. And it looks different than maybe it did back in biblical times, but people are looking for him and they're searching in all the wrong places. They just are. Like people I love are trying to find this place of home, this place of belonging, and they just are not finding it because they're not willing to step in and see that it's Jesus who is that home. We are a part of helping meet that thirst. It's such a holy mandate that we've been given. And we are going to see how these kinds of encounters, they multiply. So continuing in John 1, we're going to read a little bit about what happened the next day. So we're on day 3. So Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, who was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus home, the first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah." That is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "Hey, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas." The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said, "Follow me." Another thing that we heard Jesus say, "Come and see and follow me." And Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethesda. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. And Philip said, "Come and see." So 3 times in this story, Jesus said, "Come and see." And after this evening in Jesus' home, the first thing one of the disciples does, goes and finds his brother and tells him, "You've got to come see this." And then another named Philip goes and finds Nathanael and says, "Come and see." And you can see how that encounter multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. And I love this about the family of God. I love seeing this. It's just like, honestly, for so many in this room, I can pinpoint maybe those connect the dots that happened, that multiplication. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about one story within our community that had this multiplication effect. So, Nate, can you do the first slide? Okay, so there we have Cam. Yeah, there he is. And Cam loves Jesus. He loves Jesus so much. And so he meets this guy named Austin. And he's like, come and see Austin. And that was about a year ago, right, Austin? Oh, whoa, a year ago. And he says, hey, come and see. And then Austin has this other buddy, Elijah, and he says, hey, come and see. And then it's not even over yet. We got Bella. Elijah to his sister says, hey, sister, come and see. And so now, within this past year, we've seen this multiplication effect occur. And how all it is opening up your life and saying, come and see, and witnessing to what God has done in your life. All you're sharing is what God has done in your life. And can we just give it up for this group of 4 people? I know 3 of them are here today. And we're so glad. We're so glad that you accepted the invitation. And we're so glad that with Cam, and who knows how it started with Cam. You know, there was a whole line of multiplication that got to Cam. And then I truly believe that with the 3 of you, like one day there's going to be I hope there's a massive spreadsheet in heaven that just says, okay, here are the dots. Look at what this one moment did. And I have one more story later, just a little bit about that. So Jake and I are a part of Dad and Dawn's community group. Every other Sunday we get together and we talk about this kind of relational community that multiplies. And I wish I would have put this on screen, but I didn't. But I want to read this, and I want to read it right, so I'll look at my notes. We're learning about how a community that has intimate connection through participation in anything that centers on the nature of Christ, who he is and what he has done. That's the kind of community we are building to. It's centered on Christ and it's intimate. God has all sorts of ways he shares his light with the world. And we see from Jesus' example here, hospitality is one of them. Hospitality was the secret sauce of the early church, and it's still a transformational aspect of the church today. And it's for everyone. So how do we do this? How do we do this? I think it looks a lot like opening our hearts, opening up our calendar. It means showing up even when we feel inadequate. It means showing up when we feel awkward, because let's be honest, there's a lot of times we feel awkward, people. But the goal is not to show them how great we are. So the pressure is off. The goal is to show them how great Jesus is. And so it's okay if we're awkward. It's okay if we say the wrong thing. It's okay that sometimes maybe I made a meal for someone, instead of putting in sugar, I put in salt. That's a bad mistake. And these were missionaries, and I felt really bad because I'm just like, oh, I see you once every 6 years, and here's this terrible dinner. You know what? We had a wonderful time of encouragement together. And it's going to look different for every person. We're all so different. And a full answer to how we do this kind of sacred hospitality would take a long time today. But I have another story about a small encounter I want to tell you about. And so, Nate, if you could do the first picture. So this is my friend Julie Covert, and she loves babies. Loves babies. Like, if you are by her and you could be literally have an arm that's almost off, oozing blood. If a child walked in, she'd be like, oh, excuse me, I'm going to go over here and talk to this child. She just loves children. And about 20 years ago, she was in a Baker Square. I don't know if you guys remember Baker Square. And she was eating dinner with a couple people. And she looked across, and there was a little baby. And pretty soon she was ignoring her whole table and just paying attention to this little baby. And then the little baby started making eyes at her. And before you know it, Julie's actually getting into the booth with this family. And she starts to just ask questions about their life. And this woman that was there with her baby, she was new to Christ. And she was looking for a church home. And so Julie's like, hey, you should come to our church. You should try this out. Come and see. And so what happened is that next Sunday, her and her husband showed up with their little baby boy. And that week, actually, Jake and I were in the nursery. And I was one of the first ones to change his diaper at our church. Yeah, that's true. I remind him of that. He's like 20-something now. And so they showed up. And you can go to the next picture, Nate. And here they are, Chuck and Melissa. And that's beautiful lacrosse. And through the years, we've partnered with them through so many things. Like she would help me lead women's retreats. She's a very gifted designer. And even Jake and I, one of the first things she did for us is Jake and I celebrated 10 years of marriage, and she made these beautiful bouquets just to celebrate the occasion. And she's one of my close friends. I love her so much. And they just became a huge part of our community. They both are gifted musically. Their family became a huge part. Their daughter eventually married someone who is now on staff at that church, and so they both lead at that church. And so you don't know what's going to happen. But can we go to this next slide? So there we are. What's the connection there, I wonder? How did what Julie did impact us? What I want to tell you is this beautiful room we're sitting in was designed by her. She is gifted with design, has her own little design company. And so when we walked in here and saw this empty space and we're like, what are we going to do? She came down right away. And we walked through the building and she said, I think you should do this. I think you should do this. And we really did everything she told us to do. And so here, my friend Julie, just doing what she does, loving on babies, maybe crossing a little boundaries, joining them at the table, in the end, became a blessing to us. People she's never met. And honestly, financially, just as a church plant, we still rely on outside partners. And Chuck and Melissa have given to us, this church, from the beginning and still give to this church. And so all that started because someone was making googly eyes at a little baby and using her gift that she had to be a blessing to the person in the next booth. I love little stories like this. And like I said, there are so many. Even in this room, there's so many. But it's about heart posture. It's about heart disposition. It's about being willing to share what God has deposited in you, what he's given you. And one thing he's given you is time. Like, I think about me, and I'm always running late. You all know this about me. But just that Julie had time to pause everything and crawl into that booth and talk to that young, stressed out mom. It's so beautiful. And the beautiful thing is that we just show up, and God is the one who does the multiplication. We couldn't have structured any of this. We couldn't have organized any of this, but God does it. What we have been given, we need to be willing to share. We've been given so much. I know it doesn't always feel like it, people, but our lives are so abundant. They're so full. We know who the Messiah is. Question is answered. And God, he tells us that he gives us everything for a godly life. We have everything we need. But it might look different. How you do it It's going to be different than how I do it. If you look in 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 7, it says, there are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit is the source of them all. There are different kinds of service, but we serve the same God. God works in different ways, but it is the same God who does the work in all of us. And so we take what we've been given and we show up. We invite others to come and see what we share, what we have, and what we've experienced by meeting Jesus. So if you've received mercy, you give mercy. If you've received favor, you give favor. If you've received acceptance, you accept. If you've received belonging, you help others belong. And if you've been forgiven, which we all have, you forgive. And the list goes on and on. I think we should give this hurting world a full sensory experience to who Jesus is. Worship team, if you want to come back up. So we're going to go back to John the Baptist to just wrap up today. At one point, John, being imprisoned, sent some of his guys to Jesus. He told them, hey, find out if he's the one, if he's the guy. Ask him. Or should they keep looking for someone else? John responded, or Jesus responded to John's disciples, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. With that response, John had his answer. The rescuer had arrived. May it be that every time we ask someone to come and see, by opening our lives, by sharing what we have, every time we show mercy, favor, acceptance, belonging, and forgiveness, be a proclamation that Jesus, the rescuer, the light of the world, has arrived. We're going to sing a song just here in a minute with Esther and the team. And one of the lines goes, my life is an open space for you to come and have your way. First of all, our lives are open spaces. I know a lot of times we don't feel like they are. We've got lists, right? Things to do. But what a freeing thing when we take all those lists and we throw them aside and we say, okay, Jesus, I'm an open space. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do for this person? How do you want me to be an extension of your love and mercy and grace? Who do I need to take time to say, come and see? And I want you to really just do some heart work right now. And I'm going to ask that everybody stand. And just, like if you can, just make yourself open. Just make yourself open, even posture-wise. And sing these words as a declaration to Jesus.